Before we go anywhere, I want us to all take a moment to recall what the acronym MAGA actually stands for. Make America Great Again. Therefore, by its name, the MAGA movement is an America First movement above all else. Not a conservative movement, not a Christian movement, but an American movement, whose end goal is to resurrect the lofty spirit that made America a world superpower in the first place. Now, while I've never been a hardline patriot, I've always been more enamored by the aforementioned spirit, the whole land of the free, home of the brave thing, than the actual country itself. I recognize now that this is mainly because I had the misfortune of growing up in an America that looked to be on her deathbed, at least on the, for lack of a better word, spiritual front. And while I've also never been a spiritual person, you're going to hear me use the term a lot in this video for no other reason than that no other word exists that serves my purpose, other than perhaps the occultic term egregore, which is used to refer to a living idea, not to be confused for a meme, which is a discrete pattern of thought. Basically, if a meme is a single note or chord, then an egregore would be the entire song. Gods, for example, or the great mythical heroes of modern and antiquated legend are conglomerate bodies of ideas, just as how a human being is an amalgamous mass of events, experiences, and physical structures earned over the course of many lifetimes. This, I believe, is what constitutes, again, for want of a better word, a soul. So if you're an American, by which I mean you're a person who lives in and is a lawful citizen of the United States, and any of what I've just said resonates with you, or if you just don't like the place this country's in at the present moment, then whatever your feelings toward the former and imminent president, the health and wellness of the movement whose mimetic template he helped to coin should be your topmost concern right now.
Apologies for this interruption. I just thought I should let you know that this script was written a few weeks before President Trump's inauguration. The reason Wolf is uploading it now instead of back then is because his brain is made of sawdust. We thank you for your understanding. Now back on with the show.
To explain why, I need you to understand why I do think it's the greatest country on earth, which should not by any means be taken as me saying it's perfect. To understand that, we need to go back to my first principles, which, with my extensive creative backlog being what it is perhaps best expressed through the romantic lens of the noble rogue. And while, unlike the bulk of the card-carrying libertarians, I'm not demented enough to believe a world full of perfectly free radicals will ever be possible so long as humans are bound by the limits of our biology, I do believe in the general supremacy of the generalist over the specialist. What do I mean by this? For a specific example, have you ever noticed how many major forests tend to only have less than 5 species of trees, if that? This is because, in a stable, or at least a consistent environment, those organisms most optimally suited to exploiting the particularities of said environment's niches will not merely survive, but thrive. Those that grow largest the fastest will spread their seed the farthest, prospering to the point of literally overshadowing their competition. And the same goes for the animals also. Now apply that same logic to human economics, remembering that capitalism is just the term for economic Darwinism. And recall how our world, and I do mean the entire world, is now the sole property of around 8 major corporations and 7 main government bodies. Now you begin to see what makes America the diamond among the coal. We of all the major nations on Earth alone retain, mostly, an aggressively independent spirit that is the hallmark of the general survivalist. In nature, this attitude of survival through attrition is best exhibited by robust and ubiquitous species as the rat, the cat, and the dog, or more accurately, the rodent, the feline, and the canine, all of which possess enduring qualities that retain their utility, which is the fundamental basis of a thing's value, and efficacy over the long term due to their greater diversity of aptitudes. And this is the fundamental strength of America, its meaningful diversity, brought about by the unapologetic independence of its people, fostered through their competitive markets of all sorts, all of which have historically been facilitated by its spanning the reach of an entire continent. In short, America, both as a nation and as a country, perfectly marries the cultural and spiritual strengths of Western Europe with the material and territorial advantages of Eastern Asia. We are a nation of generalists who can just as easily produce as many specialists as are required for any field, task, or purpose a country or state could ask for. Very quickly, for those who aren't aware, the difference between a state, a nation, and a country. A country is a geographical region controlled by a single state. A nation is a group of people united by their shared ethnicity, race, religion, history, culture, or geographical location, or a combination of the above, and a state is just another word for government. And as I'm sure that last paragraph just triggered a bunch of people from all sides of the title's issue, let me now offer us, if not a common platform, then at least a mutual battlefield. You see, just as how a genetic code, or genome, carries the working model of an organism's biological structure, a memetic code carries the working knowledge of a nation. What people mean when they say that the far left or right can't meme is that the memetic codes for those groups is incompatible with that of mainstream society. In other words, the woke can't meme for the same reason that a duck and a swan can't procreate. In nature, speciation occurs when multiple groups of the same species are geographically isolated from one another for prolonged periods. Genetic mutations accumulate in both that, over sequential generations, beget more complex patterns which snowball until they become mutually exclusive. This same process can also beget national and cultural division. Two groups of people, isolated from one another's influence for a series of generations, come together to find they're no longer compatible as their goals, views, and histories have now become mutually exclusive. This is why freedom of association, freedom of expression, and freedom of movement within a country, especially one as geographically diverse as the United States, is paramount to its long-term viability. Only by keeping its international and intranational bonds at least somewhat elastic will it retain a sufficient balance of pressures to retain its capitalistic equilibrium. For just as how an interminably isolated species will eventually become inbred, a culturally isolated nation will become cultish and eventually become infertile, if not suicidal. We're always told that discrimination is a bad thing, that to cast presumptive doubts on someone, to act on preconceived prejudice, is both morally wrong and rationally absurd. And while I'd agree that casting people in a blanket, arbitrary light with zero room or tolerance given for nuances or growth is often a symptom of paranoia or immature elitism, it's also worth pointing out that, much like the word consequence, which just means the direct result of an action, discrimination in and of itself is not only not an innate evil, but is in fact a vital feature of the human condition. For instance, if I were to magically reach into your head and turn off your ability to discriminate, then the very next time you got the slightest bit hungry, you would grab the very first thing that came to hand and very likely choke on it and die. Why? Because I would have just taken away your ability to categorize things, and by consequence, your ability to tell the difference between food and not food. This is why cultural fidelity is paramount. Your memetic code must remain not pure in an isolationist sense, but pure in the sense that is as free from errors, contradictions, and harmful mutations as possible. But how do we discriminate between a harmful or a beneficial mutation? Well, first off, what is a mutation? For our purposes, a mutation is a deviation from or in a normal pattern within a working system. It's important to note that, according to evolutionary theory, all present features originate as deviations of a previously established baseline. So, how do we establish a memetic baseline? That is, how do we decide what is normal? The short answer is, we don't. Our common most experience of life does. For instance, if your whole life's experience of, say, African Americans is as illiterate slaves, and if your nation, that is, the people with whom you share ancestral, racial, and/or cultural kinship, has deliberately kept you apart from the other group for this reason, it would be an all too natural conclusion for you to think that they are somehow bad or innately inferior, especially when they bow whenever you pass them and refuse to meet your eye when they speak to you. Since their experience of growing up in slavery is so fundamentally alien to yours, you would have no frame through which to conceive of this dynamic as anything but indicative of your innate superiority as a being. Remember, people judge things by their own experiences. When what they see contradicts what they're told, thence belies the roots of every religious, political, and cultural schism that has ever happened on Earth. Our modern culture war is no exception. And here's where I at last get to the point indicated by the video's title. Karl Marx's fundamental error was his belief in the standard Enlightenment era, thinking that humans are innately good and rational, and so when they act badly or senselessly, that is, in ways that run counter to a presupposed utopian ideal, it can only be because a corrupt outside influence has warped their minds and colored their judgments such as to make them act against their own self-interests. In reality, it's the other way around. People do what they believe is in their immediate self-interest, though they are often deliberately misinformed, misled, and misdirected by the powers that would use their ignorance to foster their own control. What we all need to understand is that, just like any other animal, humans want what's best for themselves, since any animal that fails to provide for its own needs, its own wants, its own security, i.e., an animal that fails to survive and or reproduce is one whose genetic variation, whose soul, as it were, will die and wallow in oblivion along with their physical corpse. All of this is to say that any human, no matter their race, their creed, their sex, their nationality, or their cultural background, is going to act according to whatever best suits their desires and interests. If that also happens to benefit someone else, great. If not, then it becomes a CBRA, cost-benefit risk assessment. Like I've said before, nature is Machiavellian. It cares not for how or why a given thing happens, only the end results matter. And the end result of any policy that's actually going to have meaningful benefit for the American people, restricting immigration, raising wages, cutting taxes, lowering living costs and asset prices, is going to be the rich and powerful becoming slightly less rich and powerful, and there's no version of reality where they're going to just sit there and accept that. So counting on them, any of them, to do any meaningful damage to the system that's been screwing the rest of us over while lining their own pockets is like asking a nest of cobras to help you develop antivenom. Even if it's within their power to do, why would they when it directly contradicts their own material interests? Remember, you don't become one of the richest people in human history by playing fair. You do it by playing to win. And as I've said in previous videos, very often playing to win means breaking the game for everybody else. So before you go putting your trust in a sociopathic snake who doesn't care who or what they have to destroy to stay at the top of the pecking order, remember the wise words of the immortal internet icon, Jim Sterling. Corporations and their owners are never your friends. They're predators, and they're always hungry. And there's my friendly little PSA for today. Don't let this spoil the soundness of your sleep. Remember what I always say, life's too short to take seriously. If you've no power to change things, why worry about them? Go along, live your life the way you see fit, and just try to keep yourself occupied. Because really, at the end of the day, there's not a whole lot else any of us really can do other than wait and hope. Of course, you can always hit the like or subscribe buttons too, that would be appreciated. Or you can go check out my books over on Amazon if you're looking for a distraction. And now the first one's up entirely for free over on the Royal Road, and will also be coming in chapter bursts here on YouTube, so be sure to sign up for that too if you've the time to spare. And on that note, until next time, as always, stay safe, stay sane, and never forget the wisdom of the immortal Sith Emperor Valkorion. Beware the snake who thinks himself a dragon. Peace be upon you.